Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Rev Dr Rick Dacey, Senior Minister, Wesley Congregational Life.
In filmmaking, there is an important technique called the reaction shot. If you were at the Opera House this morning, you would have maybe been part of some of those reaction shots. But in filmmaking, it's very, very important. The camera's eye turns away from the events of the main scene to focus on characters' reactions to it. The response that we see in them gives us a deeper insight into the meaning of the words and the action in the main scene. Now, there are times when an event in the story is so amazing, so incredible, so awe-inspiring that depicting it with the big budget CGI, 3D, IMAX, special effects, all the effects in the world could only diminish its power. And in times like that, a master director will not depict the event. The master filmmaker will allow the reaction to stand alone, to tell the story, revealing the power of the event in the faces of those who are witnessing it. When the awe and wonder are too much to fit on a cinema screen, we can see it in a good close-up reaction shot. Not only can we see it, but we can identify with it on a very human level. We can look into a character's eyes, look into their face, and we can see it. We can glimpse what they are experiencing. We can feel it with them. In a sense, the reaction shot is how the four gospel writers tell the story of resurrection. If you read the accounts in the four Gospels, there is no direct depiction in the Gospels of resurrection or anywhere else in the Bible. There's nowhere that we see Jesus rising from the dead. We don't see his eyes open. We don't see the grave clothes being removed. We don't see him rolling away the stone. We don't see him emerging from the tomb. We don't see any of that main action. What we see is a series of reaction shots of Jesus' followers reacting to the stone rolled away, to the empty tomb, reacting to heavenly messengers, reacting to encounters with the risen Christ. When the risen Christ does appear to his followers, he appears in the most understated way possible. So much so that when he appears to disciples on the road, they don't even recognize him. They take him for a common stranger until he's revealed in the breaking of the bread. It's so understated. But we see in the reaction shot, or in the series of reaction shots, that what's happening in the main scene is not only wonderful and awe-inspiring, it is life-transforming, it is world-changing. Look at the scene in tonight's reading. Jesus' followers are huddled in a darkened room. They're shut off. They've shut themselves off from the world. Do you know what that feels like? Do you know what it feels like to shut yourself off from the world? Do you know what it feels like to have life close in on you to the four walls around you? Do you know what it feels like to feel like your journey has come to a dead end? They're huddled in that darkened room. They're confused. They're adrift. They're anxious. They're grieving. And we see it in the reaction shots. And it's dinner time. Jesus drops in on their darkened room dinner. And Luke gives us this series of 3 wonderful reaction shots in succession here. First, we see this reaction as he says, "Peace be with you." Couldn't have a more gentle greeting to them. This is not Jesus coming in, floating 3 inches off the ground with a glowing halo and radiating out light with a reverb in his voice. "I am the risen Christ." No, he just appears among them. And he says, "Peace be with you." But then we see the reaction shot. They're gobsmacked. They are startled. They are afraid in his presence. In his most understated presence, we see the awe in their faces. Can you see the reaction shot? Can you identify with that? Well, Jesus gently assures them that it is him. Look, touch, it's me. Which leads to the second reaction shot. And it's a sentence that flows better in the Greek than in English, but I think the NRSV really captures it pretty well. It says, "While in their joy, they were disbelieving." It's a wonderful reaction. Can you see that disbelieving joy? While in their joy, they were disbelieving and still wondering. Their hearts are celebrating. Jesus is here, and their hearts are celebrating, but their heads still can't make sense of the wonder of it. It can't take it in. This is not possible. What they are witnessing is not possible. Jesus was beaten and bloodied and hung up on a cross. He breathed his last, and they took his body down, and they wrapped it tight. His heart had stopped. His breath had stopped. His brain and his internal organs had all shut down. Rigor mortis had set in. He was laid in a stone-cold tomb, and the door was sealed. He was dead. And their heads are telling them that that's what's real. That was the end. The story is written, the book is closed. And their heads are telling them that what they're experiencing now is just not possible. It is not possible that Jesus is standing there in their presence, physically in their presence, talking to them. It's not possible. But despite their stunned belief, they are filled with joy. In their joy, they are disbelieving. But they are filled with joy, and they can't help it. They can't stop the joy. It's uncontrollable. They can't help themselves. And you can see it in their faces in Luke's reaction shot. And it simply says, joy. Again, Jesus is as understated as he can be. I mean, he's getting more and more understated here. Jesus responds to their joyful disbelief. What does he say? You have anything to eat? This is the risen Lord who says, you have anything to eat? This is what my kids say when they get home from school. This is no grand declaration, just, you have anything to eat? Of course, he knows that they do. He knows the answer to his own question. He knows that they have fish. I mean, he's the risen Messiah, so he knows. But more than that, he can smell it. He knows that familiar aroma of fish roasting, broiling over a smoldering charcoal fire. He knows that they have fish, and he asks the question to gently prompt them. And he leads them to this delightful third reaction shot in the scene. They give him a piece of broiled fish. No words. They don't say anything. They don't confess anything. They just give him a piece of broiled fish. You can see it, can't you? You can see the message. Their minds are still confined in that darkened room, but their hands are following their hearts. And they give him a piece of broiled fish. This reaction shot, the disciples serving the risen Christ in the midst of their joyful disbelief. This is a beautiful image of hope. Jesus eats the fish in their presence, which might seem appropriate for Easter. What do you eat around Easter weekend? You eat fish, right? Or some people do, because nowadays fish is pretty big around Easter weekend. But back then, the disciples, when they were huddled in that darkened room, they weren't eating fish because of cultural tradition or religious practice. They're eating fish because for them, fish was what they knew. Fish is what they'd always known. For them, fish was comfort food. And they needed some comfort food. So they're eating their fish, and it was an act of faith and hope for the disciples to share their fish with the risen Christ. Remember, fear and doubt in their heads are still telling them that the story is over. The book is closed. But in serving him the fish, their hands followed the hope and joy of their hearts. They didn't catch on right away. But Jesus had a message in this meal. Jesus had a message in this meal, and it's a message that would not have been lost on the early Christians in the early church, in the first centuries. The first readers of Luke's gospel would not have missed this message. It was, you see what he did with the fish. They'd have caught it. They'd have seen it. In the first centuries of the Christian faith, the sign of the fish was full of message, full of meaning. In the first centuries of the Jesus movement, Christians made an acrostic from the Greek spelling of fish, ichthys, which in English would read, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. In a time of persecution, in a time when the violent power of the empire was trying to crush and stamp out this young Christian movement, followers of Jesus used the sign of the fish right under the Romans' noses to communicate with one another. They used fish to mark places of Christian worship. They used it to mark places of Christian burial. And an ancient tradition says that they used it also to communicate with each other, with strangers. A Christian might casually draw an arc in the sand. And if the stranger would draw the other arc and make the fish, they knew that they were safe, they could trust each other in this environment of persecution and violence. So the fish was an incredibly powerful and meaningful symbol to them. To the Romans, the fish was just meaningless graffiti. To the Christians, it was a sign of hope. As Tertullian wrote in the 2nd century, we little fishes, after the image of our ichthys, Jesus Christ, are born in the water. And it was a sign that declared, no matter how things look now, however bad things may look now, the story is not over. The book is not closed. God is just getting started. We see it from the very beginning when Jesus encounters fishermen. Exhausted, sore, discouraged as they wash their empty nets. They've been working hard all night and they have come up empty. They have nothing to show for it. You ever feel like that? Your life ever in that place? You ever feel like you're doing everything you can, you're trying as hard as you can, but you just can't make it work? Sometimes it feels like we're pouring ourselves out, doing all the things we've always done, but the nets are coming up empty. And we're ready to quit. We'll wash our nets. We'll call it a day. Maybe we'll get going tomorrow, but we find ourselves losing heart and losing hope. You ever find yourself there? I believe there's someone in this room who knows what I'm talking about. Whether or not you've ever been fishing, you know what I'm talking about. You know what it feels like to be one of those fishermen sitting on the beach, washing an empty net, wondering if they're ever going to catch any fish ever again, thinking, is this how the story ends? Jesus tells Simon, put out to the deep water. Let down the nets for a catch. Can you imagine Simon's reaction shot? Simon's head is telling him that's not going to work. That's not going to work. His head is telling him, what can a carpenter preacher tell a fisherman about fish? His head knows better. It's no use. The nets are coming up empty. End of story. But Simon doesn't follow his head. His hands follow his heart. And following Jesus' command, Simon and his partners, they let down their nets. And the next thing you know, they are pulling up so many fish that the nets are breaking and their boats can barely fit all the fish that they're pulling up. Do you hear the message of the fish, my sisters and brothers? Do you hear the message of the fish that Jesus has for us? But wait, the real miracle in this story is yet to happen. It's not the catch of the fish that I think is the real miracle here. Here's the real miracle. Jesus says to the fishermen, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. From now on, you are going to fish for people. And they pull up their boats on the shore. Watch this for the miracle. They pull up their boats on the shore and they leave everything behind to follow him. They leave boats overflowing with fish. That's like leaving suitcases of cash on the beach. Half an hour before, they were losing hope because of their empty nets. And now they're ready to let go of full nets to take hold of hope. It's an extraordinary reaction. And God is just getting started. We see it again down the track as the disciples are following Jesus. When Jesus has compassion on a hungry crowd, and he orders his disciples, you give them something to eat. And this is one of those stories where we see it across the Gospels, but Mark has a great reaction shot in this story. The disciples have just explained to Jesus quite reasonably why they just aren't going to be able to follow through with his idealistic command. They explain it to him thoroughly, why it's simply not going to be possible for them to feed 5,000 people with the food they have. And Jesus simply says, well, what do you have? What do you have to eat? Go and see. I love that part. Go and see. So somebody has to go and do a quick inventory, which doesn't take long. And they come back, and to put an exclamation point on it, it's 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus. End of story. Close the book. I mean, even if you could get 5,000 breadcrumbs out of the loaves, how on earth are you even going to begin splitting up these 2 fish among 5,000 people? It just doesn't make sense. The story's over. Close the book. But you see, the Lord has a message of hope in those fish. The Lord's message is, the story is not over. The book is not closed. God is just getting started. And this morning, Keith brought a powerful message of hope to the nation and beyond in that amazing passage from John's Gospel. The risen Christ has already appeared at this point to the disciples twice. And that's a comfort for them in their grief. But they still haven't caught the message that this changes everything. So what do? They go back to fishing. That's where Jesus finds them when he comes to them again. They're not out there continuing his work in word and deed. They're not living out his mission. They're not doing the feeding and the healing and the caring and the sharing that he's prepared them for 3 years. No, they have gone back to fishing. You know, they have all let Jesus down. They know that they have let Jesus down. Simon Peter feels it most intently. And so they've gone back to fishing because it's what they know. It's what they have always known before Jesus came into their lives. And they're not having any luck, though. They're not having any luck with their fishing, funnily enough. They're not having any luck. Until they hear this bloke on the shore call out that they should cast their nets on the right side of the boat. And they do, probably just to humor this guy. And when they do, there are so many fish in the net that they can't even get the net into the boat. That's when it dawns on them that that bloke on the shore, that's the Lord. And John gives us this wonderful, this amazing reaction shot of Simon Peter. He grabs his coat and he dives into the water. This is not the hesitant, halting disciple saying, Lord, if it is you, call me to come out onto the water to you. No. This is Peter leaving behind his dignity, leaving behind his inhibitions, and diving into the water because he knows that he just can't help it. He knows he needs to be with his Lord. And he swims to be with his Lord. It's this amazing reaction shot. His only hope is to be with Jesus. And when Simon Peter and the other disciples do reach the shore, well, now it's the risen Christ who serves them broiled fish. The disciples sit and eat the fish, and out of this meal, Jesus restores Simon to relationship. He renews him to his calling, and he revives him in hope. The story is not over. The book is not closed. God is just getting started. And now, what if the lens of Easter is turned on you, on your life? What is your reaction shot? Will the lens capture a face that says, yes, 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 Christ is risen indeed. Christ is risen indeed. I know how the story ends. Close the book. Hallelujah. Or does the Easter lens see something very different in your eyes? Does your face speak a message of hope? There's someone in this room tonight. I believe that there's someone in this room tonight whose face is reflecting that message of hope. You know where you need to be. You know who you need tonight. You haven't come here tonight to go through the motions of Easter, to sing the songs and say the words. You know that you need new hope. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know where the broken places are, where the hurt is, where the healing is needed. I don't know. I don't need to know. That's not for me. But God knows. Sisters and brothers, hear the message of the fish. Remember the sign of the fish. Your story is not over. The book is not closed. God is just getting started. This is a resurrection hope. A hope that transcends all that is against us, all that weighs us down. Your story is not over, because your story is His story, and because He lives, we too shall live. New life begins with resurrection. New life for me. New life for you. New life for this world. So my sisters and brothers, as you come to this table tonight to share in this simple meal, remember the sign of the fish. Remember His promise for you. And know that He is with you always. Always. Hallelujah.